Time for another edition of the Improbability Engine's after show. As we focus on politics here, and I'm going to let my buddy Joe Darnell take off with it.
Well, Will, I've been thinking about something. You know, we talk about politics, and I think everybody kind of understands where we lean a little bit on our political slant. That's not to say that they understand our complete kind of ideologies as it comes to politics, because I think we're probably more conservative in some areas than people would like to think. I think that's absolutely
no doubt.
But I was thinking about this. One of the things I like to do is try to understand my own position better. It's something that I only had like 6 weeks of debate whenever I was in high school. We needed one more guy just for the debate team, and they're like, "Hey, what are you doing?" Like, I don't know. And they're like, "All right, well, come join the debate team." So I was on the debate team for like 1 week. One of the things that they did impart to me was that, look, if you're going to be a debater, you got to understand your position. Before you even think about their position, you got to understand your position, because you don't even know what your weaknesses are. You don't know how to, set up an argument. You don't know how to do anything unless you know what your position is. So I started looking at free trade. Now, ever since I was, probably a kid, with the election of Bill Clinton, you have Democrats pushing free trade. It is a conservative position. Free trade is a conservative position, not a liberal one. Don't let anybody tell you different. It's based in the Democrats have justified it using liberal ideals, but from a business standpoint, it is conservative economic theory. And I honestly do believe that free trade does give a net benefit to a nation. The problem is, who gets those benefits? That's the problem we've got right now. We've got all kinds of free trade. I got no problem with free trade. I got a problem with how it's getting to people, how the people are affected. And I figured out what it is. While we've been pushing for free trade, there's going to be a gap. There's going to be a lag between the benefits coming in and the jobs going out. Those old economy jobs, what they like to call them, old economy jobs, manufacturing, stuff like that. Well, there's going to be a gap between when the benefits of free trade come in and when those jobs are lost. And in the 1930s, they figured out a way to minimize that. The brains trust that Roosevelt put together came up with a social safety net. It came up with, with workman's comp, but also unemployment insurance.
The WPA.
The WPA. How do you take care of these workers who are displaced from their job by large scale economic things that have happened, right? And from its inception, it has been under attack. It has been absolutely bombarded by everybody. Everybody is bombarded. People on the left say it doesn't go far enough, and it doesn't. The people on the right say it's a threat to liberty, and okay, only if you're fighting for the liberty of failure. If you want to be free to be homeless, if that's what you want to do, then sure, it's fighting against that liberty. But it wasn't until the 1990s, whenever the Democratic Party decided, you know what? Yeah, we can do that. And they started whittling away at the social safety net, as well as pushing for free trade. Under free trade, if something bad happens to you, you've got the ability to survive and be retrained, go into a different line of work, do something else, or if you're of a retirement age, you don't die penniless and destitute. You don't lose your home. You don't have to live on the street. But they've been doing away with that. They've been working to get rid of that, under the guise that it's somehow better for everybody that we do that. So if you want to see where the failure of free trade is to working people, look no further than to where the social safety net has been eroded. And frankly, I did not expect to find that, but that's where I am. I'm perfectly fine with free trade, but the first thing it's got to pay for is for workers to get new jobs, to not have people having to work 3 and 4 minimum wage jobs to try to make up for a lost job that got shipped overseas.
There's a lot of truth in what you say. I tend to be opposed to free trade. I'm opposed to NAFTA because I think it's had a deleterious effect on the United States economy in some ways. Although you can't deny the fact that in some it has contributed to GDP growth.
Right.
It's just that it has had a bad effect on manufacturing employment in the United States.
Well,
now,
it's all based on the lie of trickle-down economics.
TPP, obviously the Trans-Pacific Partnership, I'm afraid that's going to have a similar effect. Here's the thing, though. Nobody wants to attack the problem in a nuanced way. All of the solutions that you hear are very simplistic and probably wrong-headed. Now, I like what Bernie Sanders said about not having the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I tend to agree with him. And I tend to believe that NAFTA should be renegotiated or rescinded. However, there are economists who will tell you that protectionism is what caused the Great Depression. I don't know if that's true. I'm not an economist, but you mentioned debate. I recall a college debate round where the other team argued that protectionism caused the Great Depression, and they had evidence from numerous economists to back that up. So it's at least a viable theory, and as a result, I don't know if it's a good idea for us to go that direction. What we need to do is find a way to get the benefits of free trade without the harm.
Agreed. The big thing that you've got to remember when it comes to this stuff is how much the industry leaders themselves influence the writing of these quote-unquote free trade agreements. That happens in every free trade agreement. It just does. It's been made worse recently by the inability of the law to throttle the amount of money that these industry leaders can do to buy and sell the people negotiating the actual document. Used to, when I was a kid, you'd have senators from Michigan and the representatives from Michigan who, instead of being introduced as such, would be called, now here come the senator from GM and the senator from Ford and the senator from, and that's how they would do it. In those times, yes, they did have an inordinate amount of sway from those companies, but they did it because all the people in their district worked for those companies. So their votes were kind of swung that way. So while I would criticize that to a point, generally speaking, that's what they should be doing. They're representing the people that they work for. Nowadays, that's not always the case. Nowadays, you'll have a senator whose wife is a former labor secretary who is now an interior secretary whose company just happens to get some beneficial treatment on certain aspects and whose personal wealth has gone up astronomically because of their governmental influence. Now, is it direct? Depends on how tight you want to call it. But that's the problem we've got now. You talk about Bernie Sanders. You can criticize the man for a lot of things, and he's probably earned some of it. The biggest criticism that people gave was that he talked about the influence of money in these systems and how everything seemed to be he'd tie everything back to Wall Street and to big money. But let me tell you something. He's right.
Well, he's absolutely right.
You want to know why something happens? Follow the dollar.
Absolutely. There's just no question about that.
Look at Trump's cabinet picks, for Christ's sakes. I mean, look no further than who he's got picked up there. It's the military-industrial complex and Wall Street run amok.
Absolutely. Now, I saw a speech that he gave the other day, and it was hilarious. Because he told the truth.
That shouldn't be newsworthy, but I understand where you're coming from.
He was talking about the fact that he had appointed all of these Wall Street types, and titans of industry,
Right.
or was going to appoint them to his cabinet. And he said, now back when I was running, I said we were going to drain the swamp. And when that line was first suggested to me, I thought, oh, that's tacky. No, that won't work. But everybody responded to it. So I started saying it more. I started saying it as though I meant it. He's giving speech to these people, and to their credit, they were clapping and going nuts. And then when he said, I started saying it as though I meant it, some of them went,
what? Well, here's the issue.
He basically admitted that it was just a technique, that it was all a lie, that he never intended to drain the swamp.
Right.
And of course he didn't.
Right.
That's why his cabinet's made up of oil company executives and Goldman Sachs and Wall Street executives.
Absolutely. And the big thing to remember, and I think this all comes from the problem that all politics in America is facing right now. Too often it's been, how do you convince someone to vote for your guy? That's been the whole thing. The whole basis is, how do you get them to vote for your guy? And they do it using Madison Avenue rules, right? I don't know if you ever saw the television show The West Wing.
Yes.
But in one episode, during the re-election campaign, they talk about the 10 words. The 10 words that sum up a position. It's only 10 words long. It needs to be bite-sized. It needs to be a summation in 10 words. There's no room for nuance and understanding in 10 words.
That's true.
And I believe it's even less than 10 words now. I think it's whatever 3-word or less phrase you can get someone to be energized by your campaign. And it's not a Republican or Democrat thing. It is both sides who do this. I mean, think about what...
Well, along those lines, I've got to tell you, I thought liberals were different. I truly did. But then I got in a discussion on Facebook with people over the Jill Stein recount challenge in Michigan. Mm-hmm. And Michigan law requires that the person filing for the recount be an aggrieved party. Mm-hmm. And the definition of aggrieved party required that they be somehow harmed by the way that the election turned out.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
It was clear that Jill Stein was not an aggrieved party. She got 1% of the vote. There was no way that she was disadvantaged by any chicanery in the election. It was clear that she had no standing. And I told the people involved, who were liberals, all of them, because this was like the Rachel Maddow Facebook discussion page, I told them, I said, look, this is going to be denied. She won't get the recount in Michigan because she's not an aggrieved party. Right. And none of them cared or would believe me or accept that. And then, of course, 3 or 4 days ago, the Michigan Supreme Court says she has no standing. She's not an aggrieved party. Right. So you're right. Liberals are just as bad as conservatives in this respect.
I watched something, getting back to Bernie Sanders, because I don't know if Bernie Sanders is the answer, but I know for a fact that Bernie Sanders has some answers. I watched him, it was called Bernie Sanders Goes to Trump Country, something of that nature. He's in a panel discussion with Trump voters from a red state. Now, Bernie Sanders might be one of the most liberal guys in America. I really think that's the case. I think he's a liberal guy. And he goes up there, he's talking to this lady who's a Trump supporter, and he's not pandering. He's not bullcrapping them. He's just talking about the issues. That's it. He's talking about cause and effect and what they think. And he doesn't do anything more than have her tell what she believes. He asks her 2 questions. She gives a little bit more information. And he says, okay, we actually are on the same side on this one. Here's the problem we've got. Over the past few decades, trillions of dollars have been cycling to the top 1%, top 1/10 of 1%, and all that I've asked for him to do is to help offset some of the costs on the people on the bottom. And she goes, well, yeah, that's kind of what I hoped would happen. And he goes, but that's not what's going to happen with Donald Trump. And she goes, I didn't know that.
Wow. Now,
nobody takes time to talk to voters anymore.
This brings up something that I want to talk about because it's something almost no one understands, okay? Yeah. In the sense that people think about the federal debt, it doesn't exist.
Right.
Okay? People think that someone can call in our debt. That's not possible. It's not like we took out a loan from a bank or something like that, okay? In the sense that people think about debt, there is none. What the government does is it sells treasury bills. They're like savings bonds, but they're short term, okay? And they sell these treasury bills. Now, what people don't understand is they sell them all the time and redeem them all the time. Last year, they redeemed $94 trillion of treasury bills.
Absolutely.
Think about that. $94 trillion.
Yeah.
But they sold $95 trillion worth of treasury bills. The way to think about it is not as debt. It's as though these people who own the treasury bills are stockholders in the country. That's the way to think about it. And like businesses, when they need to raise capital, they issue additional stock. That's what the government does when it's selling these treasury bills. It's issuing stock in this country. It's not debt in the way that anybody means the word.
Well, and that's the biggest farce ever perpetuated on the American people, is that somehow your bank account and your household is how a government runs. That's just not true. It's just not. It's not true. There's not a checkbook. There's not a simple means of everything. There's not. You know, there's no light bill, there's no water bill. The complexity of the federal government, of any government, of state government, of municipal government, the government of Murray, Kentucky is more complex than your household bills are. So if you try to understand a municipal government setup the way you try to understand your own checkbook, you're doomed to failure.
Absolutely.
It's not the same. It's just not. And anybody who tells you different is selling you something.
That's right. And they talk about, oh, your grandchildren will have to repay this debt. That's just not true. It's just not. And it boggles the mind sometimes. Now, a lot of the so-called debt that's really treasury bills, a lot of them are owned by government agencies.
Social Security.
Social Security, yes. Yeah. Social Security owns like $2.7 trillion worth of treasury bills. And people are fond of saying, oh, the government stole the Social Security money and spent it on other things. No, they didn't. The Social Security Administration had a surplus, and rather than leaving the money in a bank where the bank could speculate with the money and lose it on Wall Street, they took the money and bought treasury bills with it, which is exactly the safest investment they could conceivably have.
The thing to remember with treasury bills,
they have a negative interest rate right now, by the way.
Because people are desperate to own them. It is the most secure place to put your money, period. Anybody who tells you anything else is trying to sell you gold coins or trying to sell you a CD or a Roth IRA or whatever. Now, they're the least sexy form of investment. But think about it like this. They're going to pay out what they say they're going to pay out. Otherwise, the entire government has collapsed. And frankly, your T-bills are the least of your worries if that were to happen.
Yes.
Do you think it's somehow going to be better with gold if there is no government? And the answer is no. You know what I mean? People don't understand what it is. I challenge anybody who listens to this podcast. I want you to find a reputable source, and you can find them online for free. A lot of universities have this online. They love talking about national debt because it's such an overused straw man. Go read about it. The national debt is 2 columns on a piece of paper on a ledger that's held by the government. They could write it off anytime they wanted, and it would just kind of go away.
That's right.
But they don't want to do that. They want to sell stock, because the more stock they sell, the stock that they have out, they keep redeeming and selling, because they want to maintain the liquidity of the investors. They want the investors to see the T-bills as great things to have.
And it's important for there to be a safe place for individuals and companies, other countries, to put their money.
Absolutely. Well, and there's a really great example right now. We talk about T-bills having a negative interest rate at this point because people are lining up to put money into them because it's safe.
Right.
There was a time a few years ago when state pension programs, etc., took their money and said, well, we're not going to put them in T-bills. We're going to put them into something else. And they got into housing-backed securities. Now, the problem with housing-backed securities wasn't that housing itself was bad. It was a combination of a lot of negative factors that caused a complete collapse. Now, the collapse itself should not have been that bad. The problem is, it was in an unchecked, unfettered area with no regulation. So the first housing-backed securities go out, and then you've got a derivative, which is a bet on that bet. And then you keep going. There's a bet on the second bet, and the second bet has its own bet system, and there's 4 or 5 bets there. And then they've got bets on made-up things that don't exist, housing things that don't exist. They're just places to put money as a bet. And everybody thought they were secure because nobody was looking. And they weren't. And pensions are going broke because of it.
If they had left the money in T-bills...
If they had left it in T-bills, now, would they have had a robust 12% for 3 years? No.
But it wouldn't have collapsed.
They would also have money at this point.
That's true.
Now, that's one of the areas that you're also seeing. We talk about free trade and the gap, that lag. That's one of the areas that have happened. They've gotten rid of pensions. There are no pensions anymore. Everybody's trying to be a 401k. Everything's a 401k, which is privatized Social Security is what it is. Anytime they tell you privatized Social Security, it's a 401k. It is a stock and bond-based, market-driven
And the
investment.
reason, let's be clear, the reason that politicians, Republicans mostly, want to privatize Social Security, it's not because they think there will be a greater return on it.
Right.
No, it's the administrative fees. Because in order to buy stocks, you have to go through a brokerage firm like Goldman Sachs, and they take a 2 to 3% administrative fee.
$10 trillion.
Yes, and that will be billions of dollars for them.
It's a corporate giveaway. It is just giving money, giving your money that you've earned. Right? Now, It might not be the same cash that you put back because that's not how Social Security works. But it's money that because you have paid your insurance payments, you're covered to a certain extent in your life. You've got it. Congratulations. You've done your part. Now here's the benefit. Right? So what they're going to do is they're going to take your benefit and they're going to say, oh, by the way, we're going to have it subjected to the whims of Wall Street, and Wall Street's going to take a couple $1 billion off the top.
And people who think that the stock market reflects the economic health of the country don't know what they're talking about, because it has nothing to do with it. It is
not anymore.
It is completely artificial.
Yeah, not anymore.
Completely artificial.
There was a tie.
Companies raise the price of their stock by buying back some of it.
Yeah.
and that artificially inflates the price of their stock.
Yep.
And what they'll do is they'll take out a loan to buy back some of their stock. That raises the price of their stock. Then they issue it for the higher price.
Right, exactly. It just goes to show you that if you have someone telling you something that sounds too easy and sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah.
If there was a silver bullet that could do away with national debt, which we have, the silver bullet I mean, would you do it? Well, let me let you a little secret. In 1824, Andrew Jackson becomes president. Actually, no, it's 1828. He becomes president. One of his first things he does, he decides he's going to get rid of the Bank of the United States and pay off the national debt. He wants to pay it off completely. You know what he does? He pays off the national debt and ends the Bank of the United States. It causes the U.S. economy to collapse because there's no safe place to put money. Everybody's over-speculating, they're too invested, and when it collapses, people lose their shirts. It's over. It's done.
Yeah.
That was the last time the United States completely paid off its national debt, because everybody else learned.
And it was, yes, it was a disaster.
Yeah.
And, you know, people talk about we should go back to the gold standard. Okay, look, right now, since we've gone away from the gold standard, we have a recession in this country about every 9 years, okay?
Right.
It's just the way things turn out. We're due for one. But before then, we had 2 or 3 panics, not recessions, and they didn't call them depressions back then. They called them panics.
Yeah.
We had 2 or 3 panics a decade.
Yeah. It would be, and now here's the other thing we got to think of. The only reason we got out of some of those quote-unquote panics, which are flash depressions, they are depressions that happen in a period of a month and everybody's broke. And it's not just everybody's broke as in, oh, well, we don't have a lot of money. Because you're on the gold standard, there's no money to be had. There's specie problems. Nobody has money. And the problem with that is while you could barter with your neighbor for eggs or milk or cheese or labor even, you couldn't pay your taxes that way. You can't pay your taxes with labor. You can't pay your taxes with eggs. And so there were farmers. The people it hit were the people who had the least access to cash, to gold. And that's farmers. That's poor people who work for a living. So that's what the threat is. It's not going to be Goldman Sachs that runs out of money. It's going to be Joe and Jane Public who don't have cash to pay their tax bill. That's a threat that we're under. We're under threat now for that very reason.
Anything else?
There's a lot, but not today.
All right, that brings to a close this episode of the Improbability Engine.